anticipate that in the next few days I will be indicted by Mueller for some form or other of giving false information to the special counsel or to one of the other grand jury or however they want to do the indictment. But I'm going to be criminally charged.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Well, I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving. Donald Trump spent his at Mar-a-Lago with his friends who paid $200,000 a pop to be members of his private club. That's not a normal thing for a president, by the way. He may or may not have spent it wondering who might be the next friend or associate to flip on him in the Russiagate probe. That clip you just saw was Roger Stone associate Jerome Corsi, godfather of the birther lie, previewing a possible indictment by special counsel Robert Mueller. Just over a week later, there's still no indictment, but a plea deal could be in the works. The Washington Post first reported, and Corsi later confirmed, that he was in plea negotiations with the special counsel. If the two sides do reach a deal, it could be key in determining whether Trump or his advisors knew in advance that WikiLeaks planned to release stolen Democratic emails during the presidential campaign, or if Trump was merely a WikiLeaks superfan.
This just came out. WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks.
Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks.
They've got to start talking about WikiLeaks.
The wonder of WikiLeaks.
Oh, we love WikiLeaks. Boy, they have really WikiLeaks. They have revealed a lot.
WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks.
That came out on WikiLeaks.
This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You got to read it.
Let's bring in Maya Wiley, MSNBC legal analyst and senior vice president for social justice at the New School. Paul Butler, Georgetown law professor and former federal prosecutor. Matthew Miller, former chief spokesman for the Department of Justice. And Elliot Williams, former deputy assistant attorney general. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to start here at the table with you, Maya. Jerome Corsi, according to this New York Times report, friend of Roger Stone, is in plea talks with Mueller. Here's a quote from the article from the New York Times. A person familiar with the talks said that the prosecutors had presented Mr. Corsi with evidence that he had not been truthful when investigators asked him whether he knew beforehand that WikiLeaks was going to publish emails stolen from Democratic computers during the campaign. He knows he lied because he said it on his own show.
Right.
So it doesn't seem to be the wise move to lie to the FBI. That's what he did, and he's admitting it. So that means what?
Well, first of all, it means he's obviously facing at minimum a perjury charge. We don't know if there are other charges, and if he's in plea negotiations, it means he has something to offer Robert Mueller and his team.
Yep.
So the important question becomes, what might that be? And there was some suggestion in an exchange earlier this week that there may have been information about whether or not he knew that there was a conversation with Donald Trump, between Roger Stone and Donald Trump. I mean, remember, we have a lot of lying from a lot of folks who have been connected with the Trump campaign.
Yes.
So far, so he's just yet another. Roger Stone is the person who is most likely right in the crosshairs in terms of who might be indicted next, because there's no question that he and Mr. Corsi not only have a relationship, but had been having a lot of communications about the email exchanges.
Let's talk about who Jerome Corsi is. For those who don't remember, he was the guy who made up the birther, who started, sort of popularized the birther lie before Donald Trump did. InfoWars DC bureau chief. They have a DC bureau chief? That's weird. Writer for WorldNet Daily, author of the 2011 book, Where's the Birth Certificate? The case that Barack Obama is not eligible to be president. Roger Stone testified to the House Intelligence Committee that Corsi gave him Oppo research on John Podesta, who of course worked with the Clinton campaign in 2016. Here's Roger Stone on the radio yesterday reacting to the news of Corsi's possible plea deal.
The assertion that Jerry Corsi knew in advance that John Podesta's emails had been obtained and would be published would be news to me, because he never told me anything of the kind, and he never obviously passed on any such documents.
Okay, so Paul, you know, Roger Stone is very good at saying, I didn't know anything, but during the campaign he was like, I know what's coming. You're going to be in the barrel next. He seemed to know who was going to be in the barrel. He's now doing a good job of saying, I don't know anything about anything. But what is the thing that could be offered that's bigger than you if you're Jerome Corsi?
Yeah, so again, it could be, you're right, that Robert Mueller does not come for people lying to the his investigators. He's already indicted Gates and Flynn and Papadopoulos just for that. So he could just have a bad attitude. Of course, he's a nutcase. He's a liar. He probably did perjure himself in front of the grand jury. But more likely is that Mueller is throwing the book at Corsi to force him to tell the truth. And so I'm a Chicago Cubs fan. There's that famous double play, Tinkers to Evers to Chance. So think Jerome Corsi to Roger Stone to Donald Trump. Corsi and Trump were booed up, according to Roger Stone. They were bonding over their shared lie about where the president was born, President Obama was born. So if Corsi talked to Trump, if he talked to Paul Manafort, his former, Roger Stone's former business partner, about anything to do with the timing of the WikiLeaks hacked email, if they coordinated, that's collusion, that's conspiracy, that's a federal crime.
And so, Elliot Williams, let's go to that, because that was actually the question I was going to ask you as well. Is if so we know that WikiLeaks published the stolen emails. They're trying to sort of pass themselves off, saying, well, they're just a journalistic outfit that just received this leak, and that's what they did. We know the emails were stolen and they were hacked by a Russian outfit, and 13 members of which have been indicted, this little cell. Is it required that someone in the campaign or someone associated with Donald Trump told him, hey, these emails are going to be dumped out? And is just knowing that this stolen material was going to come out in and of itself a crime?
Well, yes, so it's, again, people are sort of hungry for the smoking gun, the smoking email, the email from Vladimir@Kremlin.ru that says, hey, Donald, here are the emails. I have them for you. I'm going to serve them for you on a platter. But what we have is a constellation of individuals who have information, potentially, and potentially might have been interacting with the Russians and may well have been knowingly passing this information on to the campaign. And so while there may not be the direct nexus that I think, people who are unfamiliar
independent criminal violations are identified. Mueller's use of that theory in his Russian social media indictment is a textbook example of a 371 conspiracy to defraud the U.S.
And so who knows what Robert Mueller has and what the special counsel folks will be able to put together. We just don't know yet.
Yeah. And so, by the way, on this question, because we had this discussion really for, what have we doing? How long have we been doing this? Almost 2 years? About whether or not collusion is a crime or whether you have to call it conspiracy. There's a guy named Randall Eliason of the Sidebars blog who writes that it actually is a crime, citing a recent federal judge's ruling. And this is what Eliason writes. It definitely can be, and the crime is conspiracy, which we've heard Paul Butler say, even if no other independent criminal violations are identified. Mueller's use of that theory in his Russian social media indictment is a textbook example of a 371 conspiracy to defraud the U.S., and that theory has now been validated by the trial judge's ruling. To Paul, I'm just going to, both of you are nodding that is true.
Yeah, that's right. And so, again, part of it is that these 19 Russian intelligence officers were indicted for conspiracy to defraud the United States. But again, it's not a vague conspiracy just to mess up the election. It's a conspiracy to get Donald Trump elected.
But one really important point, they don't have to have actually influenced the outcome of the election in order to be guilty of a crime.
Okay.
That's really important.
It carries with it the same sentence as the underlying offense. So if you've conspired to violate election laws or commit wire fraud or whatever, you can still be charged and sentenced and prosecuted for the full offense.
It's like if you conspired to rob a bank, but even if you didn't come away with the money, you'd still be guilty of the crime.
Drove the getaway car. Same thing.
Exactly. Right. It's why people who are in drug offenses who just drove the car, and you've written a lot about that. I want to go to you, Matthew Miller, because all of this hinges on, everything we're talking about hinges on the fact that we'll have an unfettered investigation that Mueller is going to be able to complete that won't be interfered with by the Justice Department. You used to work there when it was a very different Justice Department. So now we're looking at a guy named Matthew Whitaker running the Justice Department with all the information that we're getting. How can the American people be confident that whatever it is that Mueller comes out with will actually, A, become public, become presented to Congress in a way that it can become public and transparent, and that it won't be interfered with by Matthew Whitaker?
I don't think they can at all be confident in that fact. Look, there are strong institutional pressures inside the Justice Department for someone in the Attorney General's job to do the right thing. You have to worry that if you try to quash an investigation without evidence that it ought to be ended, if you interfere, if you do something inappropriate, there will be people who write memos about it, which everyone has now become familiar with over the past 2 years, that culture. There will be people that leak about it and ultimately will come out to Congress. And that is probably true. But, it doesn't mean that if you have someone who is in that job solely to kind of unduly influence the investigation, someone who's there, for example, to quash a subpoena for the president or to keep a report from coming before Congress, they may decide that it's worth taking that risk. It's worth, taking the political scandal of quashing an investigation because that's what they're there to do, and they cut a deal with the president to do that. And I think that's the concern I have about Matthew Whitaker. Look, ultimately, I think if let's say we get to the end of this investigation, the special counsel has included he cannot indict the president, and he has submitted a report to the grand jury and wants that to go to Congress, or wants to submit a report directly to Congress. That is the kind of place where you could see the acting attorney general reach in and stop the special counsel from doing anything to make that report public. Yeah, I think you'd see Congress subpoena it, you'd see it litigated, but that litigation could go on for months, if not years. It could go on through the president's reelection. So I think people shouldn't have at all confidence that the attorney general can't do that. They need to, fight, as much as they can to ask for Mueller's conclusions to ultimately be made public in some shape or form.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the concern is that litigation could be going on right now and we wouldn't know. Under the regulations, the only thing we find out right away is if Whitaker fires Mueller.
Right.
But if Mueller comes to Whitaker and says, I want to subpoena Donald Trump to the grand jury, or I want to indict Jared Kushner, Whitaker has the power to say, no, you cannot do that. And under the law, we don't find that out until the end of the investigation in Mueller's report.
So he could be obstructing him in real time.
Yeah, under the regs, he is supposed to notify Congress. And with the Democrats coming into the House in January, that does at least give them the power to try to create some accountability there for those decisions. But the other thing is really important is if this Corsi plea, whatever becomes of it, turns into an indictment of Roger Stone, which we expect it will, the indictment itself and whatever comes forward from the indictment can potentially become public if there's a trial. Now that's a small little ray of hope because that also could take a long time. But remember that Roger Stone is a key player in this in the sense that he's the one who got Paul Manafort hired by the campaign. Yep. He's the one who started saying in July 26, he tried to buy information from hacked emails, remember, from Henry Greenberg back in the spring of 2016. He's the same guy that in July of 2016 kept saying that the Russians had emails. Yep. And then the day he was supposed to have had dinner with Julian Assange, he then started saying, oh, it wasn't the Russians, it wasn't the Russians. Yeah. That's a really suspect public record already. Yep. So an indictment of Roger Stone might not be a small thing.
And indeed. And the other things that I think people are concerned about, Elliot, are whether or not if there is a subpoena. So Rudy Giuliani this week basically said that he doesn't think that Mueller would win a battle to subpoena Donald Trump, which you would think that the Nixon precedent is that he would win a battle to subpoena Donald Trump. But it's the question I always ask, who would make Donald Trump abide by that subpoena?
Okay, a couple things. Number one, it's hard to take just about anything Rudy Giuliani says seriously. No, I'm serious, though. This is an individual who, he has a career as a prosecutor and so on, but has sort of gone off the rails in the last couple of years. So let's start from that framework. Sort of like Matt had said before, any question over subpoenaing a president is going to end up in court, and it's going to take a very, very long time to litigate. Now, there are very strong arguments for why the president, ought to and could have to submit to a subpoena. But again, I'll be candid that there are reasons why that argument might lose, and so it's just it will open up a lot of complicated litigation that could last certainly through the presidency and beyond. Now, again, potentially Robert Mueller or the special counsel team has stuff in the hands of other prosecutors' offices, in the hands of other offices within main justice that potentially could get at information another way, and just because of the legal complexities that might be created by either, as as Matt had said earlier, Whitaker shutting it down or funny business from the White House.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a long time, and it just remains to be seen how this all shakes out.
Yeah, and if it wound up in the Supreme Court, now Donald Trump has his ringer in there. He's got Brett Kavanaugh in there as a ringer. So.
He's got a ringer, but a Chief Justice who is willing to scrap with him, evidently. So, as we learned this week.
Well, at least verbally. We'll see. All right, Maya Wiley, Paul Butler, Elliot Williams, thank you very much. Matt Miller sticking around. And coming up, more on Donald Trump's Saudi Arabia first policy.
Hey everybody, it is Thanksgiving week, and I am here at the Greater Chicago Food Depository. They do great work making sure that those who aren't as fortunate.
All right, well, happy Thanksgiving to you. That was former President Barack Obama spending his Thanksgiving volunteering at a Chicago food bank. So, meanwhile, on the whole other side of the ledger, it goes without saying that this is a hell of a transition, but just go with me on this. It is highly unusual for Republicans to criticize Donald Trump. Well, they actually did criticize Donald Trump. They criticized him this week. Trust me when I'm telling you. They joined Republicans, Democrats in condemning Trump's shocking defense of Saudi Arabia following the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Instead of backing his own CIA's assessment that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the killing, Donald Trump brushed it off, even exaggerating economic figures to give the Saudis cover. And now you'll hear that.
The CIA doesn't say they did it. They do point out certain things, and in pointing out those things, you can conclude that maybe he did or maybe he didn't. But they're vehemently denying it, and we have hundreds of thousands of jobs. Do people really want me to give up hundreds of thousands of jobs?
Okay, it should be noted that what you just heard is not true. The U.S. is not dependent on Saudi Arabia for jobs. Far from it. We're not even dependent on them for energy. We get about 4 times more oil from Canada than we do from Saudi Arabia, for example. And the Trump administration itself cited 10 times fewer jobs than 400,000 when it discussed Saudi deals last May. Still, Trump's behavior, while shocking to his fellow Republicans even for some reason, should not be surprising at all, considering his penchant for believing authoritarian figures over his own intelligence agencies. See, Russia, Putin. But it does raise some familiar questions about his motive. Joining me now, Rilla Jabril, visiting professor at the University of Miami. Matt Miller, also back with me, and David K. Johnston, founder of DCReport.org and author of It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. Thank you all for being here. So let me play one of the Republicans who actually took exception to Donald Trump's stance on Saudi Arabia this week. And this is somebody who never breaks with Donald Trump. He actually is one of his chief supporters and excuse makers, Lindsey Graham. Here's Lindsey Graham on Tuesday on Fox News.
Here's what I believe. Saudi Arabia needs us more than we need them. It's not too much to ask an ally not to butcher a guy in a consulate. This is not World War II, so I'm not going to look away at what MBS did.
So, Rula, this is unusual to even have Republicans criticizing Donald Trump, making excuse for the Saudis, but it's not unusual in the world. And I know that you're very privy to the way the world is sort of watching Donald Trump's reaction to the Jamal Khashoggi murder. How is the world reacting to it?
The world is reacting, dismissing America. They know that President Trump a year ago defended neo-Nazis hours after they killed Heather Heyer, an American citizen. So they know that Donald Trump will never stand up for the rule of law, for morality, legality. But they're moving forward, and if you saw the hearings, and this is where the next Congress and Senate can play a role. There were a hearing at the European Parliament last week where there are many testimonies. I was one of the people who gave expert advice, and within hours, Germany decided to stop, to have an embargo of any sales of weapons with Saudi Arabia. Denmark followed, and they decided, Germany led the way, and they decided to bar the 18 killers, the Saudi killers, from entering any European country, all the Schengen area. And it's an unprecedented. They need Saudi jobs, actually. They need they need to import and export with Saudi Arabia. However, they decided to uphold the rule of law. they understand that America is on a different path. Many of them, many diplomats whisper privately that the next Senate and the next Congress, the intelligence committees and other committees should investigate any financial ties between Saudi Arabia and Donald Trump and Jared Kushner.
Yeah, and I think that is the point that a lot of people are getting to, David. Washington Post publisher and chief executive Fred Ryan wrote a piece in the Washington Post entitled "Trump's Dangerous Message to Tyrants: Flash Money and Get Away with Murder." A little bit of that. He says, throughout the crisis, the president has maintained that he's looking after our national interests, but Trump's response doesn't advance the United States interests. It betrays them. It places the dollar value of commercial deals above long-cherished American values of respecting liberty and human rights. And to Rula's point, it's well known, because Donald Trump keeps saying it, that he has financial ties to the Saudis. They buy condos from him. Here is Donald Trump. Well, in 1991, the royal family member purchased the yacht Princess for $20 million. 2001, Saudi government purchases the 45th floor of Trump World Tower. 2017, Trump International Hotel visit by Saudi government officials helps boost quarterly revenue. And now here is Donald Trump talking about his business with the Saudis back in 2015.
Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments from me. They spend $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much.
So, David, do you get the sense that Donald Trump's fealty to the Saudi crown, to the Saudi crown prince, is about 400,000 jobs, which aren't even really 400,000 jobs? It's like not that, even close to that. Or is it about his own personal bank account?
Oh, it's about Donald and money. The Trump family is all about what they call winning, by which they mean putting money in their pockets. And whether they earned it legally, as they occasionally do, they stole it or they cheated, that's just fine with them so long as they get paid. Duty and honor, which ought to be at the center of any presidency, are words that have no meaning to Donald Trump. This is a man who never did one day of public service before he took the oath of office that he's going around violating all the time. So, and Donald also is, let's remember, highly gullible. Oh, Putin says he didn't interfere, then he didn't interfere. The MBS and his staff say we didn't do it, then they didn't do it. I mean, his gullibility is extraordinary.
Yeah, and that, I guess, Matt, that is what has thrown off even some Republicans, right, who don't really ever criticize Donald Trump for anything, that he seems to just take the word of almost any autocrat instantaneously. But he doesn't trust what the CIA says in their assessments. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. You now also have the Saudis on the record as wanting nuclear fuel. New York Times reporting that lurking behind the transaction is the question of whether the Saudi government that assassinated Mr. Khashoggi and repeatedly changed its story about the murder can be trusted with nuclear fuel and technology, which could be used for military purposes. If uranium is enriched to 4% purity, it could fuel a power plant, 90% be used to build a bomb. You know, you have this president going hard on Iran, getting out of the Iran nuclear deal, but now excusing the Saudi government when they seem to want to have nuclear fuel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, I don't think we know exactly why Donald Trump is so compliant with the wishes of the Saudi leadership. It might be because he's personally compromised through his own financial interests. It might be because his son-in-law has become best friends or best buddies with the crown prince. It might be, as David said, he's gullible, or I think the other way we would put it is that he's an easy mark. You know, if you throw a big party for Donald Trump, if you project his face onto the Ritz-Carlton as they did, he's going to then turn around and do whatever you want. And I think the worrisome thing is, we did hear Republicans criticize him. You played that clip of Lindsey Graham saying he's not going to look the other way, but we know that's not true. We know he is going to look the other way because we've seen 2 years of him and others looking the other way. I think the thing that we can hold some hope for now is that now it's not just up to Republicans in Congress. You have Adam Schiff, who's already said he's going to investigate the president's financial ties to the Saudi regime, the Saudi leadership, and the Saudi financial interests. I think it's critical that because this president has been so opaque about where his money comes from, where he has ties, where is he compromised. We don't know if he's beholden to interests in Saudi Arabia, in Russia, in other countries. And so there's now a bit, there's a ray of hope that you will finally see some sunlight shed into those finances, and we might get some indication as to why he acts at times in so contradiction with American interests.
Yeah, and Bob Corker, who's leaving, by the way, Senator Bob Corker, said it was as if he was writing a press release for the Saudis. Rula, having just come back from Europe, as you said, what do people in European capitals think is do they believe that this Congress, that Republicans fulminating now about Donald Trump's reaction to this murder, do they think that the Congress will actually do anything about it?
They hope that the next Congress, the next Senate, Democrats, Adam Schiff, would uphold the rule of law at least. However, they have zero confidence. You remember, Joy, when Republicans would laugh, saying we are a laughing stock in America. America is a laughing stock around the world when President Obama was in office. Well, President Trump managed in short time to turn America into a laughingstock, the most corrupt country on earth. I mean, if you look at the diplomats and you talk to diplomats, and they all are very vocal now. Even President Macron was very vocal about how nationalism actually is a bad idea. It's almost treasonous idea. Joy, if I may add regarding there's one sentence the president said he might have done it. Maybe he didn't do it. Actually, we know for a fact that Gina Haspel, the head of CIA, told her counterparts in Turkey that they have a recording of Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, telling his brother, who's U.S. ambassador, who's the Saudi ambassador to the U.S., to get rid and to silence Jamal Khashoggi. We have evidence that MBS is behind the savage murder of Jamal Khashoggi. However, the president decides, and I think for clear reason, why would Saudi Arabia would be his first foreign trip after he bashed them during the election campaign? Why would he go out of his way to defend the Saudis? Because there's money involved. Follow the money, and that's what we need to investigate.
Yeah, indeed. Follow the money. That is, I think, the rule of thumb for dealing with anything related to this president. Rilla Jabril, Matthew Miller, David K. Johnston, thank you all. And coming up, Trump finds yet another way to denigrate the United States military. So for all his big talk about his love for the military, Donald Trump just can't seem to stop disrespecting it. On Friday, the Trump administration asked the Supreme Court to fast-track his transgender troop ban before lower courts even got the chance to hear the case, urging the justices to uphold his ban, claiming President Obama's policy of allowing transgender personnel to serve poses a, quote, unreasonable burden on the military that is not conducive to military readiness and lethality. Even though research has shown that allowing transgender troops to serve openly would have little to no detrimental effect on military readiness or cohesion. We will definitely keep an eye on this story. More on Donald Trump's curious attitude toward the military when we come back. President Obama celebrated this Thanksgiving by volunteering at a Chicago food bank. There he is getting hugs. Donald Trump opted to go in a different direction, spending time at his Mar-a-Lago private membership club. And instead of giving back this holiday or giving thanks, he seemed to embrace the Festivus tradition of the airing of grievances during the traditional Thanksgiving Day phone call meant to thank U.S. troops stationed overseas.
You probably see over the news what's happening in our southern border and our southern border territory. Large numbers of people, and in many cases we have no idea who they are, and in many cases they're not good people. They're bad people. It's a terrible thing when judges take over your protective services, when they tell you how to protect your border. It's a disgrace. And I know that Chief Justice Roberts, John Roberts, has been speaking a little bit about it, and I think and I have a lot of respect for him. I like him and I respect him, but I think we have to use some common sense. This Ninth Circuit, everybody knows it. It's totally out of control.
Wow. Well, for someone who claims to love the military so much, Trump has spent the last 2 weeks skipping a World War I commemoration in France due to rain, not visiting Arlington Cemetery on the Monday after Veterans Day because he was, quote, extremely busy, even though his public schedule showed nothing on his calendar, and insulting the Navy SEAL who led the raid that killed Osama bin Laden. Joining me now is MSNBC contributor Malcolm Nance, Jennifer Rubin of The Washington Post, and Will Fisher, Director of Government Relations at VoteBets.org. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to go to you first on this, Will. Donald Trump, that call was so strange. He talked about himself going to Wharton. He talked about all sorts of extraneous things about the economy, said he's letting the troops win. They weren't ever winning before, but now he's letting them win. It was really bizarre. I read the transcript before I listened to the clips. Either way, it was bizarre. How do you think members of the military received that particular message from this president?
Well, I think the word best described it is just unfit. And Donald Trump, that was just a display of his inability to serve as commander-in-chief. Does he have the ability to act as a huckster-in-chief? Does he have the ability to act as a racist-in-chief? Yes, he does. But he is unfit and unable to fulfill his constitutional role as commander-in-chief. And people in the military, they absolutely notice that. And that's why we are seeing support for President Trump among the active duty ranks and certainly among the veteran community erode on nearly a daily basis.
And, you know, I just say with you just for a second, Will, because you know that traditionally, you know, the military is generally leaned more toward the Republican Party. There have been lots of past presidents who didn't serve and even had some controversy about not serving, whether it was Bill Clinton not going to Vietnam. You know, there haven't been that many presidents who've been war heroes. Eisenhower comes to mind, but a lot didn't serve. You had, you know, George W. Bush was in the Army National Guard, but he never saw combat. He never left the United States. So, but this president has styled himself as especially close to the military, as especially good for the military, even though he had 5 deferments in Vietnam, even though he didn't go. Apparently, according to the Washington Post, a former White House official cited the reason that he hasn't visited troops in the combat zones, which President Obama did, which President Bush did, which his dad, the other President Bush did, so that he's never been interested in going. According to this official, he's afraid of those situations. He's afraid people might want to kill him. Will, a president that's traveling has the best security on earth, but he's afraid to go.
Yeah, well, Joy, Donald Trump's been avoiding combat zones since the mid-1960s. And this recent attacks being leveled against the military by the president is just a continuation of a theme that we have seen going back from the campaign. Whether it was Donald Trump comparing, you know, his sex life in the 80s to serving in Vietnam, whether it was attacking Gold Star families as a candidate and then again as president, or whether it's something like turning over the future of our VA healthcare system to a couple of his country club buddies to try to manage between rounds of golf and over shrimp cocktail. At the end of the day, the simple reality is that Donald Trump views the military as nothing more than political props to try and advance his own racist, nativist, backwards agenda.
You know, Malcolm, so Donald Trump tried to explain why he didn't go to Arlington Cemetery, as presidents always do around Veterans Day. Here he is on Fox News Sunday explaining not going.
You're back in Washington on Monday, Veterans Day. Why don't you go across the river to Arlington for that ceremony? Barack Obama went every year he was here in D.C.
I should have done that. I was extremely busy on calls for the country. We did a lot of calling, as you know. I think.
But this is Veterans Day.
I probably, you know, in retrospect, I should have, and I did last year, and I will virtually every year. But we had come in very late at night, and I had just left literally the American Cemetery in Paris, and I really probably assumed that was fine. And I was extremely busy because of affairs of state, doing other things.
Why?
But I would have done it.
Malcolm, he was not extremely busy. This is scheduled. Can we just put that up on Veterans Day? There it is. Nothing. There's nothing on his public schedule. It's highlighted there. There was nothing. He's extremely busy. Troops don't get to say, well, you know, I thought it was enough that, you know, we did some combat yesterday and we just thought. This is really odd.
It's not odd. Let's just call this what it is. Donald Trump is a physical coward.
Yes.
He dodged the draft 5 times. No one in his family has served. Every male in my family since the Civil War has served. Let me tell you something. He is frightened of facing the situation that it will be made clear if he goes to these military cemeteries, if he goes to these memorial ceremonies, other than giving out the Medal of Honor ones because they come to the White House, that he will be reminded of his own cowardice. And there's just nothing more. He is a disgrace. He's not commander-in-chief. He's placeholder-in-chief. I have relatives who have dead comrades at La Sereine Cemetery in Paris and at the Heinz-Marne Cemetery. Donald Trump wouldn't even deign to go to one because he was afraid of the rain. And so for him to back out of going to Arlington, let me give him directions. Go around the ellipse, past the World War II Memorial, turn right, drive straight. I mean, that's all it takes for him to do it. he does not want to be reminded of the fact that he is incapable of being brave and serving his nation. He is exploiting the nation, and that's all he cares about.
Yeah, and Jennifer, in addition to that, he also seems very open about criticizing members of the military, people who are incredibly brave and gallant, but he doesn't seem to see that gallantry. He criticizes men much braver than himself. Here he is going after this. I mean, I shouldn't be shocked. Why am I shocked anymore? Admiral McRaven. The man who, you know, was the sort of the author of the bin Laden raid, who took down the person who was the author of 9/11. I mean, here he is going after McRaven, who also, I believe, is in treatment for cancer. Let's listen to Admiral McRaven.
Bill McRaven, retired admiral, Navy SEAL, 37 years, former head of U.S. Special Operations.
Hillary Clinton fan.
Special Operations.
Excuse me, Hillary Clinton fan.
Who led the operations, commanded the operations that took down Saddam Hussein and that killed Osama bin Laden, says that your sentiment is the greatest threat to democracy in his lifetime.
He's a Hillary Clinton backer and an Obama backer. And frankly,
he was a Navy SEAL.
Wouldn't it have been nice if we got Osama bin Laden a lot sooner than that? Wouldn't it have been nice? You know, think of this. Living in Pakistan, beautifully in Pakistan, in what I guess they considered a nice mansion. I don't know, I've seen nicer.
Jennifer.
Disgraceful.
What was that?
Oh, my. You know, if he had been around during World War I, he would have bad-mouthed Sergeant York. He has no respect for others. And to pick up on what Malcolm said, he is not only a physical coward, but he's an emotional, mental one as well. He understands the contrast between these great people and himself. And he has such a frail ego, such a thin skin, that all he can see for McRaven is not hero, is not bin Laden leader. All he can see is Hillary Clinton supporter, because it's all about him. It's always about him. So anyone who has slighted him, whether it was criticism from former CIA director and former DNI directors, whether it was people in the military, they are simply other critics. They're bad people. They are people who support his enemies. And it's all about him. A commander-in-chief, by definition, has to be selfless. He has to put himself behind the troops. And Donald Trump wants to be ahead of the troops, literally as well as figuratively. And remember, he wanted his parade, too, and finally couldn't get that. But that's what he thinks of the military, like his toy soldiers. Remember how he used to refer to, he still does sometimes, my generals? We don't have my generals in this country. They are the United States generals. They are the people's generals. But Donald Trump thinks of these as little marionettes who dress up in uniform, and he gets to order around. And during that bizarre phone call, he was also arguing about things he knows nothing about in terms of the correct way to run aircraft carriers. And he's completely ignorant, but he likes to show off. He wants to show them who's boss. And he gets these ideas into his head, probably from watching Fox News, and he tells them what to do. And my fear is that General Mattis will leave at some point, and there will be a defense secretary who is less resistant to him than General Mattis is, and that we will be doing some really dangerous, really bad things.
Yeah, and the my generals thing turned into the generals when he was blaming the generals for the military raid in Yemen that cost one troop their life, and he thought nothing of sending our troops to spend their Thanksgiving on the border for a political stunt. So it's an interesting contrast. Jennifer Rubin and Will Fisher, thank you very much. Malcolm Nance, please stick around. And coming up in hour 2 of AM Joy, the Mississippi United States Senate runoff and the modern-day return of retail racist politics. Schedule. Can we just put that up on Veterans Day? There it is. Nothing. There's nothing on his public schedule. It's highlighted there. There was nothing. He's extremely busy. Troops don't get to say, well, you know, I thought it was enough that, you know, we did some combat yesterday and we just thought. This is really odd.
It's not odd. Let's just call this what it is. Donald Trump is a physical coward.
Yes.
He dodged the draft 5 times. No one in his family has served. Every male in my family since the Civil War has served. Let me tell you something. He is frightened of facing the situation that it will be made clear if he goes to these military cemeteries, if he goes to these memorial ceremonies, other than giving out the Medal of Honor ones because they come to the White House, that he will be reminded of his own cowardice. And there's just nothing more. He is a disgrace. He's not commander-in-chief. He's placeholder-in-chief. I have relatives who have dead comrades at La Sereine Cemetery in Paris and at the Heinz-Marne Cemetery. Donald Trump wouldn't even deign to go to one because he was afraid of the rain. And so for him to back out of going to Arlington, let me give him directions. Go around the ellipse, past the World War II Memorial, turn right, drive straight. I mean, that's all it takes for him to do it. He does not want to be reminded of the fact that he is incapable of being brave and serving his nation. He is exploiting the nation, and that's all he cares about.
Yeah, and Jennifer, in addition to that, he also seems very open about criticizing members of the military, people who are incredibly brave and gallant, but he doesn't seem to see that gallantry. He criticizes men much braver than himself. Here he is going after this. I mean, I shouldn't be shocked. Why am I shocked anymore? Admiral McRaven. The man who, you know, was the sort of the author of the bin Laden raid, who took down the person who was the author of 9/11. I mean, here he is going after McRaven, who also, I believe, is in treatment for cancer. Let's listen to Admiral McRaven.
Bill McRaven, retired admiral.